and welcome to another episode of the Disaster Empire podcast, where we talk to innovators and thought leaders in resilience. And it's exciting for me to have Amitty Pierce here with me today to talk about the work that she's doing in operational resilience and talk about also automation, which is an interesting concept, I think, to think about in our space. So, Amitty, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, hey, we're going to dive right in, and I want to thank you to the audience and remind you to like and subscribe. That helps grow the channel. Amitty, you work with companies across the globe, Wise, Deutsche Börse, if I'm saying that right, Goldman Sachs, Amazon, etc. What does a global operational resilience program look like, and how did you get started working in this area?
Yeah, so I feel like most resilience specialists, you kind of just resilience finds you. You don't necessarily always start in a career like this. And so I guess over the years, through experience and exposure, I've just used skills that I've gathered from different industries, like working with the government and consulting. And when I did arrive at resilience, I've been able to, I guess, bring all of this together and understand that resilience is not just one single, I guess, focus area. Most companies have different regulatory requirements, and a lot of them also have global operations. So therefore, I guess through this experience that I've had, I've come to realize that an integrated resilience program, I guess with several pillars, is probably the most effective approach. In business over the years, as we've had different regulations come out, separate programs tend to be built in response to address all the different requirements. And this can sometimes, as a resilience manager, make the landscape a little bit difficult to navigate. So I guess the first step is to make sure that we're not confusing the business by trying to build several different programs in response to all of the different regulatory requirements. So the way that I would do that, and I tend to do that, is by benchmarking globally what it is that we need to do. And then in the next stage is understanding where do we have, I guess, synergies between the different regulations where we can try and leverage and capitalize and maybe future-proof our steps forward, and to be looking at things like where maybe we have similarities in testing, similarities in mapping, maybe the way that we approach assessing the criticality. And I guess this is important because it helps us to build more of a robust resilience program across the business. And it tends to have a better ROI for the business as well, because we use less resources, we are faster to operationalize, and then we can also get better engagement across the business because we're not confusing everybody with 100 different requirements. So yeah, that's kind of the approach that I would take.
I love those points. I think I haven't heard anyone talk about ROI in that way and really aligning resources, which it really is, right? And best case, you're working collaboratively across the organization through the various disciplines towards a common goal. And I love that idea of not going to the business with multiple asks that are at the end of the day very similar, right? So all really great points. So I really want to ask you, because I ask all of my guests, what does resilience mean to you? Because it's such a buzzword, right, in the industry right now. And it can mean one thing to people if you're talking about OpRes in the UK or organizational resilience. And it's great that leaders and boards are picking it up, but they might have a kind of a separate spin on it. So I'd love to hear from you how you think about it.
Cool. So the way I would think about this is in, I guess, a traditional sense, and then in maybe how I interpret resilience. So the first kind of like three examples that would spring to mind is in a more, I guess, business sense, we have internal and external resilience. So internal would be like organizational company resilience. So this is an inward focused look where we kind of understand what is important and what structures we need in place to overcome any obstacles to the operational environment. So I think this would probably be more closely aligned to like business continuity, disaster recovery. External resilience, I think, probably would closely align to this new concept of operational resilience. So this is where we have still a business focus and operational focus, but we're looking at obstacles that maybe would cause harm or disruptions to, say, our consumers or the wider market infrastructure. And then I guess for me, when I think about resilience, my focus is more related to, I guess, emerging markets and sustainable growth. I guess entrepreneurism is becoming really popular. And I guess it's really fascinating to me because we're seeing new ideas, disruption of industries like fintech, and breaking of monopolies in, I guess, very cemented markets. And so I would like to think about how we can use resilience and bringing all of the synergies together and making it less of just like a compliance or getting an A on a scorecard activity. So yeah, it would just be trying to understand how we can get startups and VCs and smaller companies to think about what it is that's important to them and how they can embed, I guess, the resilience mindset from a very young age to try and overcome any of the obstacles that you do tend to get in those first few years. So that's maybe how I would approach resilience.
I mean, thanks for those perspectives. Really picking up on the making it more than a compliance or a scorecard activity, which, we need to do for regulators. But certainly here in the US, right, there's less of those unless you're on the financial services side, on the banking, right, investments firms, et cetera, then it's, a lot more regulated. But then looking across the globe, I'm thinking not only of, those and fintechs, but, also the vendors, right, and our supply chain and really the integration. I'm definitely watching the Federal Reserve Bank and other central banks, and they're looking at all of this closely. So I think we are seeing it expand right across multiple countries. But can you help this audience with a deeper dive and walk us through what an operational resilience program can look like? Because I think that's where people are kind of not making the leap, so to speak, from the, abstract and theoretical and the regulatory, requirements on paper to what does it mean when you implement it within an organization?
Yeah, so I think to answer this question most effectively, probably for the people that are watching, it's more from a regulatory standpoint. So as I said, like we, for example, in the company I currently work in and the previous company, we have to abide by 50 sets of regulation and best practices across the world. And so like, it's how do you take all of these different but similar requirements and then put them together? So I think it's really important to try and take that integrated approach. So my first step is obviously reading the regulations, benchmarking them. And then the second step is to take the similarities. So potentially one pillar could be for DORA, another pillar could be for third-party risk management, business continuity, and then you would have operational resilience and disaster recovery. This may also intersect with crisis and incident management. Across this, in all of these pillars, we're trying to understand the people, the processes, the technologies, the third parties that support all of this, even the facilities. So generally speaking, we're just trying to map the same things, but with a slightly different end goal. So one might be wider market infrastructure and harm. One might be ICT vendors and things to do with change management and risk management around ICT. The other one could be for internal organizations to like understand what is important to your teams. Third-party risk is obviously to do with understanding all this stuff, but for our third parties. So when we do start to bring everything together, we can see there's a lot of similarities. And so I think it's just important when you do sit with any business is to, first of all, understand specifically who they're regulated by, and then understand how there's similarities in those different regulations. And that will give you, I guess, the blueprint or the roadmap for how you should roll out a resilience program to the business.
We could dive just a little bit deeper into that. Once you've benchmarked and you bring, an understanding of the regulations to the business, is it imperative, in your opinion, to really get the buy-in from senior leadership and boards if they're involved? Like, how has it been implemented from your experience?
I would probably say, yeah. So this is really interesting because everyone always uses this as like a metric or a KPI is senior management buy-in. Most of the time, if you come with something that's logical and is going to integrate different elements of the business, any senior leadership is going to be excited about this. Where you find the biggest hurdles is in the business. And the problem, I think, with resilience is too many people take this top-down approach. Like, we need a heavy hitter to push everything forward. No, actually, the concept of resilience to me is like you're leveraging the domain level experts. So technology is supporting DORA. Disaster recovery might be supported by your product engineering teams. So the best thing that you can possibly do is to go and speak to the business and actually understand what is it that you do in your section and how can this inform, I guess, those different viewpoints or the different pillars that we have. And if you have 90% of the business on board and informing this process, when you do go and speak to all of the management to say, this is a requirement, this is the feedback from the business, this is something that's practical, and this is how we can leverage what's already in place. It's very easy for them to say, yes, this makes sense, because you're going to help with, improving cost in the business, efficiencies, you're highlighting gaps and vulnerabilities, and you're strengthening, I guess, the business and how robust it is in response to, I guess, things that could disrupt operations. So yeah, I think maybe that's a different approach.
Thanks for answering that. I think it provides, additional insight into how other practitioners out there can really embed, right, resilience into the organization. And that leadership buy-in is one part, but really getting that buy-in, if you will, from the business, getting the excitement, just like you said, can be more challenging for some. So I love that idea. Hey, just if you don't mind, going to dive just a little bit deeper to kind of uncover another piece that you said. And you've talked about pillars several times.
Yeah.
And I've talked about pillars in my blog. But I want to see how you're thinking about the pillars. What do you think are the foundational elements of operational resilience?
That's just breaking down the regulations. So obviously identifying your critical or your important business services, however the terminology is that you want to use in the business. Again, we need to map those to understand those points. So the people, processes, technologies, and third parties that support this. I guess standard across is then testing what you've put in place to make sure that it's not just a theoretical document, and setting some thresholds to make sure that you can, I guess, benchmark your approach. A lot of people tend to use just time-based metrics, and I think the most difficult thing that I'm trying to overcome when I do look at operational resilience is how can we move beyond just a time-based metrics. I mean, this is really great for, I guess, like, measuring processes or potentially technologies and data, but as we've seen, I guess, over the last couple of years, there's so many more different thresholds that we need to start integrating into the business. So I'm trying to figure out how this looks. A lot of the time, I think it's a new thing in a lot of banks is we have like emerging risk departments. So trying to see maybe if we can integrate some of these things and looking at historical things that have happened in the business too, to understand maybe how we can, I guess, scope out our thresholds a little bit better. And the other thing I think we also maybe don't do so well is we write like a postmortem or an after actions report of everything, but having maybe just a different approach to lessons learned. So I really enjoy that concept, which is in the legislation, is taking time to review retrospectively how the process went, as opposed to just looking at the gaps and vulnerabilities, because I think you do learn a lot from the process, the end-to-end process of identification, mapping, testing, etc. So yeah. And then I guess the final piece is the metrics that you report to the business. So integrating those and how can you give management the best, I guess, outputs of the program.
I appreciate that deeper dive. You're also the founder of Fixity, which is a tech solution for resilience and analytics. Can you talk about how this solution really helps to embrace, support, build resilience?
So as I said before, I'm really passionate about, I guess, this buzz in entrepreneurism and the VC world. And as I'm traveling and I'm seeing, we're putting from, I guess, like the UK or the US, we outsource a lot of our activities to third countries for price. And I guess they're more competitive and the quality of service is better. There's a whole bunch of reasons as to why people decide to do this. But nobody is really there to support these businesses and VCs. I mean, a perfect example recently, obviously, was with the Silicon Valley Bank. So many people just didn't understand what they were supposed to do in this process. There's no regulations. There's no, I guess, industry guidance to say, like, what do you do in this situation? So essentially what Fixity is we just strip back everything to a minimum requirement, and it's an automated process. So people can come and help from a very young stage of a business to try and identify, I guess, their critical products and services. It's automated. It also leverages from the data that's put in different machine learning models to try and give insight into, I guess, dependencies, bottlenecks, potential exposure that they may have in the business to risk, and just helping them to dig deeper on how to remove these. Resilience, I think, is something that if we embed into a business at a much younger age, then you get a better return on investment for resources, but also for your shareholders. And you can potentially overcome that first 5 years, which is a really difficult thing. That's kind of the area that we're focused on at the moment.
That's an exciting offering, and I'll make sure to link it in the show notes below so people can check out more about it and connect with you if they are interested and want to dive into that. Well, hey, finally, along with that, you definitely have a passion for that, and you've been advocating for a greater focus on fintechs and startups in this space. So can you share more of your thoughts on that with this audience?
I think it comes from, I have mainly always worked with fairly established financial institutions. And then I moved across into the tech world and now into the fintech world. And what I'm finding is when we attend all of these different meetings is all of the resources available, although they're amazing, they don't necessarily directly translate to our industry as well. To our industry is rapidly expanding. So we're getting new people coming in. And as I guess fintechs, as I said, are breaking up the monopolies and getting involved in things where they could potentially cause harm, not only to the market, but individuals, they need to start thinking about these things too. And so where do they turn to? And how do you get advice if nothing that's available directly translates to the industry that you're in? So I'm actively working on trying to fix this problem. At the moment, I'm reaching out to all the different fintechs and saying hey, let's collaborate, let's get together, let's try and benchmark some things as an industry and understand, because although we can't necessarily share the intricacies of our business, we can definitely share our thoughts on how we may approach a situation, what worked well, what didn't. And I think that's the best thing about working in this environment is we can collaborate, and it's I guess encouraged. So we should also do this company to company. And I think we could maybe make some really good changes when it comes to resilience and fintechs.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I'm definitely seeing more of an interest and support on the part of various industries and businesses to encourage their employees, and each other as professionals to really benchmark, learn from each other, and kind of go on this journey, right, of resilience in a similar way. But as you said, just understanding there are some areas of difference and making sure that we, preserve kind of the core pieces that can't be shared in terms of, business knowledge. But that I wanted to thank you. And can you share a little bit more about your background for the audience as we wrap up today?
Yeah, of course. Originally, when I did start, I was in a little bit of a different field. I was focusing more on security consulting. So that's to do, I guess, with installation of cameras and egress systems. And I was working mainly with the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice in Australia. But whilst I was there, nobody wanted to do the procedural work on what happens in an emergency and So I just found I had kind of a knack for this and nobody else wanted to do it. So I was oh, here's my niche. And I kind of expanded this way. And then after a little while, I was you know what, I'm going to jump into it and just explore the world. So thankfully with this kind of job, you can move around and get experience. And then I discovered we have different regulatory models. So just working for different companies in different countries. And I think that is really great because you learn about different regulations, and then procedurally in different countries, how things work. And it really helps to build, I guess, your experience. So yeah, the next place I need to work, I guess, is the US. I haven't been there yet. So hopefully I can pop over at some point. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing your experience, and we'd love to have you. Definitely. I don't know if you've, reached out to the conference groups here, but I think there could be a lot learned from your experience. Hey, but I wanted to also ask you, is there anything else that you wanted to share with the audience that we didn't get a chance to talk about yet today?
No, I just mainly, if anybody is interested in getting involved in the fintech space and collaborating, I mean, I've spoken to quite a few different people, but I'm really open to this. And then also trying to find an endorsement body to help set up these roundtables and these discussion events. So if anyone is from either side of the equation and can help facilitate this, then I think that would be amazing.
Great. Great. How can people reach out to you?
So LinkedIn, I think, is probably the best way.
I'll add that link to the show notes as well. Hey, and finally, as we wrap up today, can you share a fun fact?
So I was trying to think of something fun. I don't know. But I was going to say originally I started as a naturopath. So I completely qualified in a different field that has nothing to do with this. And I think if you speak to most people in our industry, we started here and we ended up over here.
Not unusual. But it's another part of resilience if you think about it in the holistic way. So I have you in the industry, and I really appreciate you coming on and talking to us today, bringing that perspective, and really do encourage the audience to reach out more and learn from Amitty and what she's been doing successfully in multiple companies. So thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me as well. I really love your content, and it was great to be on.
Thank you so much.